Now, you are the first guest that we've had on Global Majority for Peace to talk about Pakistan. So I'd love for you to situate for us the position of Pakistan in the shifting geopolitical landscape. So let's start with the India-Pakistan conflict over Kashmir that erupted on May 7th earlier this year. The initiating trigger was said to be the terror attack in Pahalgam, carried out by Kashmiri militants in late April, in which 26 tourists were killed. India accused Pakistan of being behind these attacks, which then led to a 4-day military conflict until a ceasefire was announced on May 10th. If we go by the media's framing of this conflict, in broad strokes, India used Western-made military weapons and China provided J-10 fighter jets to Pakistan. This was reported as a success for Chinese military manufacturing and a disruption for the hegemony of the US military industrial complex. I mean, depending on what media sources you were reading. It also suggested a clear alignment between Pakistan and China on one side and the US and India on the other side. But when we look further into the matter, a much more complicated picture emerges, as you understand, I think, very well. Can you help break this down for us?
Of course. So you rightly pointed out that Pahalgam was the trigger. But I must say here that no Kashmiri group, militant or otherwise, claimed responsibility. This was an accusation made by the Indian government. And later, without any kind of investigation, on the first day, in fact, the first hour after this incident, India started blaming Pakistan. So this is the beginning. There's, of course, a historical perspective to this. The fact that the people of Kashmir have not been given the right to self-determination. Both India and Pakistan are responsible for that, but the Indian side in particular is a military occupation of 800,000 soldiers that are on the ground. And you have almost 100,000 Kashmiris who have been martyred in the freedom struggle. So that injustice and occupation is at the heart of the crisis in Kashmir. Now, after Pahalgam, if one country says, there's an attack that's happened, the other country is responsible for that. The other country, Pakistan in this case, said that we're willing to cooperate. We're willing to investigate with you. We're even willing to bring this third party investigator, the UN or even the US, and ready to cooperate with them if you are able to provide any kinds of evidence that Pakistan was involved. But India was acting as the judge and jury, and of course, eventually the executioner. And India began this entire media blitz where they said, Pakistan is the heart and center of terror in the region. India, of course, is the beacon of democracy. It's the center of civilization. This framing is very much part of what Hindutva, which is the right-wing Hindu movement, which is in power right now, led by Narendra Modi, utilizes every time it wants to shore up its base, its electoral base. Hating Pakistan is very much a political act now in India. And they accuse Pakistan of being in cahoots with the terrorists, and eventually not only accused Pakistan, but suspended the Indus Water Treaty, which is a water treaty between India and Pakistan since the 1960s. That's how we share our water. And India, basically, in an act of collective punishment, just unilaterally withdrew from the treaty. Then the Indian media and high officials started talking about how they want to reduce Pakistan to Gaza, how they want to reduce Pakistan to Afghanistan. The language was genocidal. It was manic, hysterical. And to be honest, considering that Pakistan historically has not been able to match Indian military might, we all were extremely nervous. We all were peaceniks. We all wanted peace. Anybody in their right mind would want peace between two nuclear powers. But the constituency for peace in India is gone. That's what we were realizing in those few days. And when eventually India crossed the line and began attacking us with drones, which included Israeli manufactured drones and French fighter jets, Rafales, which are kind of like the linchpin of the Western defense industry right now. Many of us thought that we will be reduced to this kind of territory with a foreign power acquiring monopoly over our skies, so a territory that is constantly punished. We all are watching the genocide. We all are watching what Israel is not just doing in Gaza, but also what it did in Lebanon and Israel and the whole region. They're pride bombing the whole region. And you have these government ministers in India saying we need to do the same to Pakistan. And we, to the surprise of not only Pakistanis, but to the surprise of the world, I think, Pakistan, which had Chinese J-10 and J-15 fighter jets, flew them, fought with the Indians, and eventually, now the world knows, we downed about 5 French fighter jets that were being flown by the Indian Air Force. So the Pakistan Air Force was able to actually inflict a historic defeat. India initially refused to acknowledge those jets that it had lost, but the shares of the Chinese defense industry just skyrocketed because the world knew that this is a world historical moment in some ways. I mean, war is, of course, a terrible thing. But you see, for third world countries, one of the biggest problems has been the quest for technology. And the reason why we've been colonized, we've been brutalized, is because the West has had the monopoly over technology, and India had the best Western technology. And we were relying on regional technology, on Chinese technology. What this battle showed is that China has decisively overcome the technological gap in the defense industry. It has broken the monopoly of the French in the skies. Now, this is not to say that China has reached the levels of the US. Of course, China is not investing all its resources and making its own people homeless to build its military industrial complex. However, it does show that now there is very real competition, and you cannot disregard the East anymore when it comes to military, which would be a situation, an unprecedented situation in the past 300 years. That, I think, is the historic significance of this battle. And within 3 days, India and Pakistan both agreed to ceasefire. I tell you, India was not in the mood for a ceasefire in 3 days. They wanted to go on and on. And right now, the Indian Prime Minister is being grilled in the parliament by the opposition, saying, why did you start this if you wanted to finish it in 3 days? What have you achieved? You've not killed one terrorist. You've not destroyed one base. You've not destroyed any of the capacities of Pakistan. And now you're also being accused of submitting to Trump's whims. When he said you do a ceasefire, you accepted it. So it's a shock to India. It's a shock to the Western defense industry. But I think it's a net gain for the Chinese defense industry. It does, of course, create problems for Pakistan internally. The problem is that the military, which historically has monopolized power, becomes even more popular. And that is a problem. But I'd rather have that and fight that internally than allow a foreign power to have monopolies over our skies.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. But why do you think Trump supposedly brokered this peace treaty? And why did India agree?
Well, India agreed because India realized that it could not have this monopoly that it thought it did. Like they really thought that the imbalance, the military imbalance was so great that they could continue fighting for a very long time. And, once you have monopoly of the sky, over the skies, then you can destroy the bases and the main military capacities and eventually then go inside the territory whenever you want. So that basically would have meant that we would have been in a situation of permanent threat from India. I think that equilibrium was built in those 3 days because of Chinese technology. For one, Trump has eyes on both India and Pakistan when it comes to acquiring the market. Pakistan is in a very interesting situation right now because historically we've been a proxy of the US. We've been a frontline state for the US, and the US is trying very hard to intervene again through the IMF, through the World Bank, also through this massive minerals deal that was ongoing in March, April, when the war broke out. These are critical minerals that will be very important in the new Cold War. So Trump has a stake in Pakistan. He has a stake in India. And his ideal situation would be that both these governments, even if they hate each other, they remain within the ambit of the Western sphere and do not move towards China. I mean, India has no chance of moving towards China immediately, although they are in BRICS. But Pakistan is vacillating, and that's a problem.